Yes, you heard that the right way the first time around. The wide receiver who was once running routes around defensive backs is now running for his entire life inside a courtroom. And the woman holding the playbook against him is the same woman who is apparently holding his pots and pans, his weekly schedule, and a couple of other things in between. Welcome back to the program. Welcome back to the only place that is going to give it to you the way the old heads on the corner used to give it to you. And welcome back to the seat where we sit down with the popcorn already buttered, the soda already cracked, and the receipts already stacked. Before we step 1 inch deeper into this circus, do me one tiny favor that costs you nothing and helps the channel everything. Hit that little thumbs up, mash that subscribe button like it just stole your last chicken wing, and tap that bell so the algorithm stops sleeping on us. Because what we are about to walk through is not a normal celebrity scandal. This is not a quick blog, this is not a tabloid blurb, this is not some half-cooked rumor. This is a full-blown federal-level mess wearing a designer sweater, and we are taking it apart stitch by stitch. And before anybody jumps into the comment section ready to throw rocks at me, I need you to understand something very clearly. I am not the one who put Stefon Diggs in this position. I am not the one who told this man to walk a private chef into his own house while he was supposedly building a serious life with a woman the entire planet recognizes by one syllable. I am not the one who decided to mix groceries with grown folk business. I am simply the guy with the remote control, the guy with the transcripts, and the guy who watched every single second of that testimony so you would not have to. Everything you are about to hear is coming straight from the courtroom record, straight from the witness chair, and straight from the official statements that have been put under oath in front of a real judge with a real robe and a real pen that signs real consequences. I am not making any of this up. I am not pulling anything out of the sky. So roll the tape, and let us walk into the only courtroom in America where the entree came with a side of allegations. Now, if you are just tuning in and you have been living under a stadium for the past few months, allow me to set the table for you, because this entire saga deserves the full setup before we cut into the meat of it. Stefon Diggs, the receiver who built his name catching impossible footballs, is currently sitting at the defendant's table in a case that has slowly transformed from a quiet little employment dispute into the loudest celebrity courtroom story of the season. Sitting on the opposing side, dressed in a sweater her own attorneys clearly picked out for psychological reasons, is a woman by the name of Jamila Adams, a private chef who insists on being called Mila, who insists she was hired as a culinary professional, and who insists that what happened inside that house on December 2nd crossed every line a working environment is supposed to honor. And hovering above this entire situation, like a chandelier that nobody asked for but everybody is staring at, is the unmistakable presence of Cardi B, who is supposedly the woman Stefon was building something serious with while all of this kitchen drama was simmering in the background. So with that picture painted, let us walk into the actual testimony, because the second this woman raised her right hand and prepared to swear on something holy, my entire spider sense lit up like a stadium scoreboard on a Sunday night. The judge asked her to state her name. A simple request. The kind of request a kindergartner can answer without breaking a sweat. And what did Mila do? She paused. She glanced upward. She tilted her head like she was trying to remember the spelling of her own first name. Now I want you to think about that for one full second. This is a grown woman, a woman who has been signing her name on tax documents and food invoices and contracts for over a decade. A woman who claims to have built a 13-year career as a professional chef, and the moment a sworn court asks her to spell out the letters of the name she was born with, her mouth hesitated like the question was an SAT prompt. That right there was the very first crack in the windshield. That right there was the very first tell at the poker table. And once I saw that opening tell, I leaned back in my chair, I crossed my arms, and I whispered to myself the same thing every veteran courtroom watcher whispers when a witness fumbles their own birth certificate. We are not about to get the truth in its purest form. We are about to get a performance. We are about to get a Broadway audition wearing a turtleneck. Then she leaned into the microphone, soft as a midnight ASMR video, and she explained that she works privately for athletes, prominent figures, and wealthy families. And while she said the word wealthy, the camera caught the way she sat, the way her shoulder dipped, the way her chin tucked, the way her fingers tapped lightly on the desk. And here is where it got even more interesting. The sweater she was wearing did not match the woman the internet has been describing for months. The internet has been talking about a chef with a presence, a chef with a posture, a chef with a personality that fills a room before she even introduces herself. But the woman who walked into that courtroom looked like she had been run through a beige filter on purpose. The wardrobe was muted. The energy was muted. The voice was muted. And to anybody paying attention, this was clearly a strategic dressing job by her legal team, an attempt to convert a known social media presence into a soft-spoken homemaker the jury could feel sorry for. The problem with that strategy is that you cannot rebrand a personality in 1 week. You can dress somebody differently, but you cannot dress them quieter. And by the time her testimony hit its third hour, the costume was already cracking. Then came the line that I knew was going to haunt her later in the trial. The attorney asked her how much money she normally makes in her industry, and without flinching, she stated that her usual rate ranges from $5,300 a week on the low end to $10,000 a week on the high end. Now write that number down. Burn that number into your forehead. Because just a few minutes later in this same testimony, this same woman, under the same oath, would casually reveal that the salary she actually agreed to with Stefon Diggs was a flat $2,000 a week. And if you do not see the contradiction, allow me to highlight it for you with a yellow marker. If your floor is $5,300 and your ceiling is $10,000, what kind of professional, what kind of seasoned culinary veteran, what kind of self-respecting businesswoman with 13 years of experience signs herself up for less than half of her own minimum rate? There is only one explanation that makes sense, and that explanation has nothing to do with food. That explanation has everything to do with proximity. That explanation has everything to do with access. That explanation has everything to do with wanting to be inside the building rather than wanting to be paid for the recipe. And the jury is going to clock that the same way I just clocked it. Then the attorney asked her how she met Stefon Diggs, and her answer was the kind of answer that makes a cross-examiner smile from the inside out. She said they connected through an Instagram message back in December of 2022, and she said the original ask was simply for her to cook. But within the same breath, she admitted that the cooking turned into hanging out, and the hanging out turned into a sexual relationship, and the sexual relationship continued for years before she finally moved into his actual home in February of 2025. Now stop and think about the architecture of that timeline. This is not a chef who walked into a kitchen and got swept off her feet. This is a woman who had a 4.5-year personal involvement with this man before she was ever placed on his payroll. So the question that immediately bubbles to the top of any reasonable jury member's mind is the most obvious question in the world. Were you hired because of your knife skills, or were you hired because of your history? Were you signed onto the household because of your resume, or were you signed onto the household because of your relationship? Because if your job interview happened in a hotel room before it happened in a kitchen, that changes the entire framing of every single complaint that comes out of your mouth from this point forward. And listen, I want to stop right here and address Stefon directly for one moment, because somebody has to say it. Brother, what were you thinking? I understand that you can run a 40 in under 4.5 seconds. I understand that you can high point a football in double coverage. I understand that you can make defenders look like traffic cones on a Sunday afternoon. But the decision-making that led you to install a former intimate partner inside your residence while you were openly dealing with another woman, and a third woman, and apparently a fourth woman, that decision-making is the slowest decision-making I have ever seen come out of a professional athlete in real time. That is the kind of move that does not just open the door to disaster. That is the kind of move that builds the door, hangs the door, paints the door, and posts a welcome mat in front of the door. No woman, and I mean 0 women on this planet, no matter how composed she pretends to be, is going to peacefully cook breakfast for the new girlfriend while quietly watching the man she used to share a bed with walk past her every morning with somebody else. That is a chemistry experiment that ends in a fire every single time. And Stefon somehow decided to run that experiment in his own living room. Unbelievable. But the testimony got even messier, because once Mila admitted that she and Stefon had a sexual history, the prosecutor pivoted toward the friction inside the household, and the floodgates opened. She revealed that around November of last year, an Instagram direct message had been sent to the mother of one of Stefon's children. And inside that message, somebody was allegedly exposing the names of all the women Stefon was sleeping with on his own staff. Read that sentence again slowly. Stefon Diggs was not just sleeping with one woman in the building. He was apparently rotating through multiple employees who were already collecting his checks. Mila said she was confronted by Stefon over whether she had sent the message, and from there a war erupted between her and another woman in the household named Lindsey Bolan, a woman whose actual job description Mila could not even define on the witness stand. She admitted she had no idea what Lindsey actually did for the household, but she did know that Stefon was paying Lindsey's rent, providing Lindsey's housing, and maintaining what Mila described as an ongoing physical situation with Lindsey at the same time he was doing the exact same thing with her. So now we have multiple women, multiple bedrooms, multiple paychecks, and 0 structure. This is not a household. This is a fantasy league. Now this is where the testimony gets strategically dangerous for Stefon, because depending on how this jury is wired, this section of the story could swing the entire courtroom against him. If even half of the jurors look at this evidence and decide that Stefon was using his money, his fame, and his employer status to create a power imbalance over multiple women living under his roof, then he stops being seen as the victim of a money grab and starts being seen as a man who turned his own home into a coliseum. Juries do not forgive that kind of pattern. Juries punish that kind of pattern. And once a jury decides you are the architect of a toxic environment, every other piece of testimony from that point forward gets filtered through that lens. So while Mila has her own credibility cracks, Stefon's own behavior was busy building a separate problem that has nothing to do with whether or not she is telling the full truth. The trial has not even reached the violent allegation yet, and Stefon is already losing yards in the court of public opinion. And then we arrive at the date, December 2nd, the day everything supposedly fell apart inside that house. Mila testified that she woke up early, prepared breakfast like she always did, and Stefon walked downstairs and casually informed her that she would not be flying out with the household to Art Basel that week. She testified that she was not upset about missing the trip itself. She was upset that he waited until the very last second to tell her. She testified that she had been on the phone with Cardi B coordinating coordinated outfits for the trip. Read that line one more time and let it cook in your brain for a second. She had been planning matching outfits with Cardi B. The same Cardi B who, depending on how the rest of this trial unfolds, may or may not have known that the woman picking out her outfits had previously been picking out other things with her boyfriend. And that one detail, that one single revelation about the matching outfits, is the kind of detail that can flip an entire courtroom audience from sympathy to suspicion in a single second. Because here's the question that the jury, the public, and every single woman watching this trial is going to demand an answer to. Did Cardi know? Did Cardi know that the chef in her boyfriend's house had a romantic history with him? Did Cardi know that the woman handing her plates of food had once been handed something else by the same man? Did Cardi know that the girl on the phone planning her wardrobe had once been on a completely different kind of plan with the same man? Because if Cardi did not know, and Mila was running around playing best friend with the girlfriend while quietly maintaining a backdoor situation with the boyfriend, that turns Mila from an alleged victim into something a whole lot more complicated. That turns Mila into a woman with motive. That turns Mila into a woman with a grudge. That turns Mila into a woman whose tears in the courtroom may not be coming from where she says they are coming from. And if it ever gets confirmed that this overlap was active, that the romance with Stefon continued every time Cardi flew out for a concert or a tour stop or a video shoot, then we are going to have to cancel everything else on the schedule and dedicate an entire program to begging Cardi to never, under any circumstance, walk back into that situation. Because cheating is one thing. Cheating with a woman who is preparing your food is a different category of betrayal entirely. That is not infidelity. That is biological warfare. Cardi could have been one bad mood away from getting something extra in her seasoning, and nobody would have known until it was too late. But let us push forward, because the testimony only got heavier from here. After the conversation about Art Basel, Mila said she went back to her room to start packing. Stefon, according to her account, walked into the bedroom behind her, closed the door, and leaned against the dresser with what she described as visible anger pouring off his body. She said the two of them had been exchanging hostile text messages all morning, and inside those texts he had been calling her names that the courtroom had to censor for the record. She said he asked her to come closer, and when she walked across the room and stood beside him, he asked her about the things she had been saying in those texts. She said she tried to respond, and before she could finish her sentence, he struck her across the right side of her face with an open palm. Now the courtroom went still when she described the slap, the kind of still that you can feel through a screen. And whether or not you believe every detail of her account, the next part of the testimony is the part that is going to live rent-free inside the jury's brain for the rest of this trial. She testified that after the slap, she pushed her hands up to defend herself, and that Stefon, who is a full foot taller than her, used his arm to spin her around, lock the crook of his elbow around her neck, and apply pressure until she could no longer breathe. She said the chokehold lasted while the two of them moved across the room from the dresser to the side of the bed, a distance of roughly 5 or 6 feet. She said she could feel the pressure tightening with every second. And then, in the middle of describing this terrifying moment, she dropped a sentence that absolutely electrified the courtroom in the worst possible way. She testified that she remembered a self-defense move she had once seen on Instagram, a technique designed to break a chokehold by sliding your hands underneath the attacker's grip. She said she attempted it, and here is where the entire room paused, because she also testified that within roughly 2 seconds of her attempting the move, Stefon allegedly told her, word for word, that the moves she sees on Instagram are not going to work on him. Now I want to be incredibly fair here. I am not saying this exchange did not happen. I am not saying this woman is fabricating the assault. But that one specific line, that incredibly cinematic, incredibly perfectly timed, incredibly screen-ready piece of dialogue, is the kind of line that defense attorneys live for. Because no jury in America hears that exchange and accepts it without raising at least one eyebrow. Why Instagram? Why not TikTok? Why not YouTube? Why not Twitter? Why the one specific platform she just mentioned a heartbeat earlier? That coincidence is going to be replayed in closing arguments until the jury knows the script by heart. And then came the detail that made even the most sympathetic observers tilt their heads. She testified that after the alleged assault, she was in so much physical pain, so disoriented, so internally shaken, that she could feel the sensation of bleeding internally, the kind of sensation that mimics a major medical event. But instead of going downstairs and dialing an ambulance, instead of going downstairs and demanding to be driven to a hospital, instead of going downstairs and calling the police, she walked downstairs, located Stefon while he was mid-massage, and personally handed him a birthday gift. A birthday gift. Let me say that one more time so it lands. The woman who was just allegedly choked to the point of suffocation went out of her way, while still in the same building, while still in the same hour, while still on the same day, to deliver a wrapped present to her alleged attacker because she had purchased it ahead of time and did not want it to go to waste. Now, if that detail does not raise a question mark inside your soul, you are not paying close enough attention. Because that is not the behavior of a fleeing victim. That is the behavior of a woman with feelings she has not fully sorted out. And those feelings are going to weigh on this jury whether anybody wants them to or not. It got even more complicated when the timeline jumped forward a few days. After the alleged incident, Mila flew to New York City to stay with another co-worker from the same household, a co-worker she herself described not as a friend, but as someone who was actually closer to Stefon than to her. Read that one more time. The first place this woman went after allegedly being assaulted by her boss was the apartment of another employee whose loyalty was on the boss's side. That is not a safe house. That is the lion's den. And then, just a few days later, video footage surfaced of Mila smiling, laughing, and breaking out into a full choreographed dance routine in that very same apartment. The cabbage patch, the two-step, the shoulder shimmy, the whole routine. Now I want to be careful here, because I know exactly what some of you are about to type in the comments. Trauma does not always look the way movies tell us it looks. Some survivors smile. Some survivors dance. Some survivors throw themselves into normalcy as a coping mechanism. I get that. The science backs that up. But you have to understand that a jury is not made of trauma specialists. A jury is made of regular people who walk into the courthouse with their own life experience and their own assumptions. And a regular jury looking at footage of an alleged assault victim doing the cabbage patch in a kitchen 3 days later is going to ask questions that no expert witness will be able to fully erase. That footage is a knife that cuts in only one direction, and her side of the courtroom is the one bleeding from it. And then we ran headfirst into the cross-examination that broke the dam. The defense attorney, calm as a frozen lake, walked Mila through her own pay stubs. He asked her, on the record, whether or not she had actually been paid for the weeks of work she had previously claimed she was never paid for. And she tried to dodge. She tried to redirect. She tried to ask the attorney for his name in the middle of his question, an old courtroom delay tactic that almost never works on a seasoned litigator. He repeated the question. She tried to dodge again. He pulled out the receipts. He showed her a payment dated November 17th. He showed her another payment dated November 21st. He showed her that the combined total of those two payments matched exactly 2 of the 3 weeks she had told the court she had been stiffed on. And just like that, in the span of about 90 seconds, her entire story about unpaid wages folded in front of a room full of cameras. She admitted that the only week she had not been paid for was the week Stefon had specifically told her not to come to work, which is the week of Art Basel, which is the same week that started this entire chain of events. So now the picture changes again. Now we have a witness whose financial complaint just got dismantled live on the stand. Now we have a witness whose story about being shorted on her paycheck has been replaced with a story about being upset that she was told to stay home for 1 week while another woman was being prioritized inside the house. And one lie, even one small lie under oath, is the kind of crack that a sharp defense attorney will hammer until the entire ceiling caves in. And here is the brutal reality of how juries work. A jury can forgive a lot of things. A jury can forgive nervousness on the stand. A jury can forgive emotion. A jury can forgive memory gaps. A jury can forgive a witness who breaks down in tears. But what a jury does not forgive, what a jury cannot forgive, what a jury historically refuses to forgive is a witness who looks them in the eye and tells them something that the receipts then prove to be untrue. Because the moment a witness gets caught in even one verifiable lie, every other word that came out of her mouth before that moment, including the heavy testimony about the slap and the chokehold, gets dragged into the same suspicion bucket. That is how human psychology works. That is how courtroom psychology works. That is how this jury, sitting there with their notepads in their laps, is going to start reorganizing their entire opinion of her account. And that is exactly why the single payment exchange may have done more damage to her case than every defense argument combined. Now, of course, I am not the only person watching this trial unfold. Plenty of other commentators, plenty of other former players, plenty of other internet voices have been weighing in, and I want to give you a quick window into the range of takes that have been bouncing around since the testimony started. One commentator, a former athlete with his own podcast, said that watching Stefon and Mila's trial reminded him that men and women alike have to learn how to control their lust before lust starts controlling their entire careers. He said the videos of Mila dancing days after the alleged assault were genuinely hard for him to sit through. He pushed back on the audience that immediately labeled her a liar, reminding everyone that they had never been cross-examined, never been forced to relive a traumatic memory in front of strangers, and never had a defense attorney trying to tear holes in their soul on a public stage. He said he believed something physical did happen between them. He said he thought Mila got too emotionally attached after years of casual involvement, that Stefon brought her into the house to keep the situation contained, and that the moment Stefon's relationship with Cardi got more serious, the eviction notice came down hard. He said the smart move would have been for Stefon to simply pay her out and let her walk, because the cost of paying a former companion to leave quietly is always smaller than the cost of paying lawyers to clean up a courtroom. He also said, and I quote with my own words, that Stefon needs to seriously consider some anger management classes and consider being significantly more selective about who he invites into his personal life. And honestly, that is one of the more balanced takes floating around right now. A second commentator took a much harder stance. She pointed directly to the pay stub moment as the death blow of the case. She said that Mila's claim about not being paid for an entire month had been publicly dismantled the moment the defense produced 2 confirmed transfers totaling $4,000. She said the only week left unpaid was the week Mila was told not to come to work, and she argued that this fact alone exposed Mila's true motive, which she described as wounded pride at being asked to step aside while other women rotated through the house. This commentator also pointed out the contradiction inside Mila's own behavior. She had no problem cooking for a household where her boss was sleeping with multiple women, including her, including Lindsey, including Cardi. She had no problem coordinating wardrobes with Cardi while the situation was still active. She had no problem laughing and dancing on camera days after the alleged attack. So why, this commentator asked, did she suddenly take such offense the moment she was asked to clear the building for one specific week? The conclusion she landed on was harsh but logical. She said this case was not really about assault for Mila. She said this case was about hurt feelings dressed in a legal costume. And she predicted that, barring any major new evidence, Stefon Diggs is going to walk out of that courtroom acquitted. So now we sit at the end of the first major chapter of this trial, and the scoreboard, at least in my own personal opinion, is leaning in a direction that absolutely nobody would have predicted on day one. Stefon Diggs walked into that courtroom carrying every disadvantage you can carry. He is a wealthy professional athlete. He is already publicly tied to one of the most famous women in music. He has a documented pattern of mixing employment with intimacy. He had multiple women living in his house at the same time. And the woman accusing him is a working-class private chef whose story, on the surface, is the exact kind of story that juries instinctively rally around. By every standard of public sympathy, this trial should have been a layup for Mila. But somewhere between the soft sweater, the spelling pause, the salary contradiction, the Instagram defense move, the birthday gift delivery, the New York dance footage, and the receipts that exposed her pay claim as inaccurate, the layup turned into a brick. And right now, after one full quarter of testimony, Stefon Diggs is somehow on top of the scoreboard. Not because he is innocent, not because his behavior was admirable, but because the prosecution has, so far, failed to deliver a clean, unbreakable, internally consistent account that can survive a single round of cross-examination. And in the courtroom, consistency is currency. Right now, Mila's wallet is empty. But before we close this thing out, I want to be incredibly clear about one thing, because I know exactly how the comment section is going to misread me if I am not careful. I am not saying nothing happened in that bedroom on December 2nd. I am not saying Stefon Diggs is a saint. I am not saying Mila Adams invented every single moment of her testimony. I personally believe, based on the totality of what she described, that something physical did occur between the two of them inside that house, and that something almost certainly crossed a line that was not supposed to be crossed. The problem is that her legal team appears to be performing the testimony rather than presenting the testimony. The problem is that her wardrobe, her tone, her body language, and her storytelling all feel curated rather than authentic. The problem is that the truth, even when it really is the truth, sometimes loses in court because of the way it is delivered. And right now, that is exactly what is happening to her case. The truth, if it is the truth, is drowning in a delivery that the jury cannot fully trust. And so we land at the question that this entire trial is going to come down to. Is Stefon Diggs guilty of what he has been accused of inside that bedroom on December 2nd? Or is this a story about a woman who once held a real position in this man's life, watched him replace her with a bigger spotlight, watched him build a more public chapter with somebody else, and decided that if she could not be the headliner, she was at least going to be the headline. Both of those stories are possible. Both of those stories carry weight. Both of those stories have receipts. And the only people on the planet whose opinion truly matters about which story is the real one are the 12 people sitting in that jury box, looking at this woman, looking at this man, and waiting for the next round of evidence to push them one way or the other. And we still have weeks of testimony left. We still have witnesses we have not heard from. We still have communications, financial records, surveillance, household staff statements, and possibly even Cardi B herself looming somewhere on the horizon of this case. Anything could shift. Anything could turn. The first quarter is over. The next quarter is loading. And whichever side scores next is the side that is probably walking out of this courtroom with a verdict in their pocket. So as we wrap this episode, I need you to do me a favor. Sit with all of this for a minute. Do not rush to your keyboard. Do not rush to the comment section. Do not rush to a verdict in your own head. Replay the moments in your mind. Replay the spelling pause. Replay the salary contradiction. Replay the Instagram defense move and the eerily perfect comeback line. Replay the birthday gift handed to a man who allegedly just choked her unconscious. Replay the Cabbage Patch dance in a coworker's apartment. Replay the receipts that dismantled the unpaid wages claim live on television. Replay all of it, and then ask yourself one honest question. If you were sitting in that jury box with no internet, no commentators, no podcast hosts whispering opinions in your ear, would you vote to convict, or would you vote to acquit? Because that is the only question that actually matters. And that is the question that 12 real people are going to have to answer in the weeks to come. Now, while you sit with that, hit the like button if this breakdown gave you something to chew on. Drop a comment with where you stand on the case so far, and tell me which witness you most want to hear from next. Some of you are going to say Cardi. Some of you are going to say Lindsey Bolan. Some of you are going to say the household staff. Some of you are going to say the digital forensics expert who has those text messages locked in a folder somewhere. Whoever you want to hear from, drop their name, because the next episode of this saga is going to be even messier than this one. And I want to make sure we are all watching the same chessboard when the next move drops. And before you click off, let me leave you with one final thought to take with you out the door. Trials like this one are not really about the people in the courtroom. Trials like this one are really about all of us. They are about what we tolerate, what we excuse, what we celebrate, and what we eventually decide to call too much. Stefon Diggs is on trial for what he allegedly did to one woman in one bedroom on one night. But the culture that surrounds him, the culture that built the household, the culture that made it normal to mix paychecks with personal entanglements, the culture that turned a private kitchen into a battleground, that culture is on trial too. And whether the verdict ends in conviction or acquittal, the bigger conversation we should all be walking out with is whether we want to keep watching this same exact movie play out, year after year, athlete after athlete, household after household, headline after headline. Because if we keep tuning in, the writers are going to keep writing it. And right now, the writers are working overtime. Now, before we wrap this whole thing up, I want to walk you through a couple of additional layers the casual viewer may have missed during this first round of testimony, because the deeper you look at the architecture of this case, the messier it actually gets. There is a reason every single legal commentator with a microphone has had something to say about it. And the reason is that this case is not really one case at all. This case is actually 4 or 5 different cases stitched together inside the same robe. And depending on which thread the jury decides to pull on first, the entire garment unravels in a completely different direction. Let us start with the contract layer, because almost nobody is paying attention to it, and yet it quietly underwrites every other claim in the building. When Mila moved into the household in February of 2025, she did not move in under a casual handshake arrangement. She moved in under a working relationship that, by her own testimony, included a defined weekly rate, a defined schedule, defined responsibilities, and defined living quarters provided by her employer. That is not a side hustle. That is a formal employment situation, and formal employment situations carry formal protections and formal liabilities. So even if every other piece of her assault testimony gets shredded on cross-examination, the contractual side of this case still has teeth. The moment a court determines that an employer leveraged sexual access or personal influence over a paid employee, the case quietly slides from criminal territory into civil territory, and civil territory is where the bigger checks usually get written. The second layer worth dissecting is the Cardi layer, because Cardi B's silence in all of this is loud enough to shake the foundation of the building. Cardi has not gone on Instagram Live to defend Stefon. Cardi has not posted a long emotional caption telling the world she stands by him. Cardi has not shown up to a single day of court holding his hand. In the world of public relationships, silence is not neutrality. Silence is information. Silence is a position. So if you are watching the woman you supposedly built a future with refuse to publicly stand beside you while your name gets dragged through every blog, podcast, and courtroom transcript on the internet, that is not a partner on the fence. That is a partner already halfway out the door, waiting for a polite exit ramp. The third layer is the household staff layer, because Mila is not the only person who lived inside that residence. Lindsey Bolan, the woman whose job nobody could clearly define, is sitting on a goldmine of information that has not yet been fully introduced. The braider, the assistant, the housekeeper, the security personnel, every individual who walked those halls has the potential to either save Stefon or sink him completely. The defense will call employees who paint Stefon as a generous, professional employer. The prosecution will call employees who paint the household as a chaotic, hostile environment. The jury, sitting in the middle, will slowly assemble a mosaic out of these statements until a clear picture emerges. Right now, that picture is incomplete. 2 weeks from now, it might be undeniable. The fourth layer is the digital evidence layer, and this one might be the most dangerous of all, because in 2026, nothing in your private life is actually private. The texts between Stefon and Mila, the Instagram messages between Stefon and other women, the messages between Mila and Cardi about matching outfits. Every thread exists on a server somewhere, and every thread can be subpoenaed and dropped into evidence with devastating precision. If even one exchange contradicts Mila's sworn testimony, her credibility takes another hit. If even one confirms it, Stefon's defense takes a body blow it might never recover from. The fifth layer is the public perception layer. Even if Stefon walks out completely acquitted, the damage to his public image has already been done, because the testimony itself, regardless of the outcome, has painted a portrait the public will not forget. The portrait of a household with multiple women on the payroll. The portrait of a man who blurred every professional boundary that exists. That portrait does not get erased by a verdict. In a league where personal brand equals endorsement money, that portrait could cost Stefon a lot more than legal fees ever will. When you stack all 5 of these layers on top of each other, you start to understand why this trial is so much bigger than one bedroom incident on one specific night. This trial is a snapshot of an entire ecosystem, and every person inside that ecosystem has skin in the outcome. The lawyers, the agents, the sponsors, the teammates, the girlfriends, the chefs, the assistants, the braiders, every one of them is watching the same scoreboard we are watching, and every one of them is recalculating their own position based on which way the wind blows in that courtroom.